Pawn endgame puzzle are based on the theoretical concept. So if you have a solid understanding of the theory, you will able to solve them very effectively. However, there are many theories to learn and remember, and we have already created several videos on the pawn endgame theory. So if you are interested in exploring them, the link is in the description box. The theory for the today's puzzle is about rook's pawn against the opponent king. So if you have only one pawn on the board and that is the rook's pawn, or you convert your pawn into the rook's pawn by capturing the opponent piece, and if opponent king is in front of the pawn, there are some chances that opponent can make this game as a draw. So to understand this concept little deep, let's jump on the board.
Look into this position. It's a white to play and there are two black pawns on the board and one white pawn on the board. White pawns are moving upwards and black pawns are moving downwards. Because it's white to play and white can have an easy chance to capture the pawn on f5, and of course black cannot push his pawn to the h3 because then there is a chance that white will take the pawn. So we don't need to worry about after taking the pawn on f5 if black start pushing its pawn on h3. So we as a white first take pawn on the f5. Now from this position black clear cut have a three different option. Either the king can go to the d4, king can go to the d6, or pawn to the h3. Let's review everything one by one. What if black decided to push his pawn to the h3? Here the idea is very simple, that white can easily grab the pawn on h3, and now if black have a clear option of king to d4 or the king to d6, if king goes to the d4, this is a mistake for the black because now there is no chance that black can stop the white pawn. If you can count, and e6 so occupied, so king don't have an easy route to chase the pawn and white will easily promote. After white taking the black's pawn, if instead of d4, if king decided to go to the d6, there is a slight thing you need to be careful. Now this time you cannot push your pawn to the h4, otherwise the game will end up as a draw because now black have enough time to stop the pawn promotion. And it starts with king to e7. We can shift our king to the g6, king to the f8. Of course, white can go to the h7 and king to f7. And now this is a complete draw position, irrespective where the white pawn is, even if it's on the h2 square or it is on the h6 square. Let's see on the board if now white decided to push the pawn to the h5, king to f8. Now black will only rotate its king between f7 and the f8. King tried to come out to create some space for his own pawn by king to g6. Black will go to the g8, and now you can push the pawn, but black will easily hide in the h8 square. And from this position, if you move your king away from the pawn, the black will take the pawn. And if you shift your king to the h6, the game will end up as a stalemate. So even if white grab the pawn on the h3 square, if black go to the d6, you first take control of the position properly with king to f6. After this, even if king goes to the d7, you first take your king to the f7, and now there is a clear path for the white pawn which black cannot stop because it's too late, and even e7, even e6 square is also blocked, so white can easily promote to new queen. After pawn takes on the h3, there is a very easy way for white to win from this position. So again, let's go back to the position where white takes the pawn on f5, and from here I told you there are three different options. King can go to the d6 or the d4 and the h3. We already covered the h3. Now let's jump what if king goes to the d6. This is a slightly interesting option, and there is where you need to be more careful. After this, of course, as a white, you have a different option, or king to f4, king to g4, or king to g5. But the only winning move is king to g4 because all other are not so effective. Let's understand why they are not effective. If white decided to shift his king to the f4, then black will simply push his pawn to the h3. And this is time where white have to capture the pawn, because if not, then black will start pushing its pawn, and black's pawn is closer to the promotion square. And if white grab the black's pawn on the h3 square, which means white converts its pawn into the rook pawn, and black king is in front of the rook's pawn, and black king can easily stop this. So to avoid that, what all white need to do is the winning move with king to g4. Of course, this time again, black will try the same trick with pushing the pawn to the h3. Now, the question is for the white, will you capture it with the king, or will capture it with the pawn? And the answer is you should not capture it with the pawn. Otherwise, your pawn is converted into rook pawn. Opponent king is in front of the pawn, so we will not able to promote. So instead of that, white should capture the h3 pawn with the king. If king takes the pawn, this is not about rook's pawn. The pawn is the knight pawn, and no matter what black will do, white can easily control the position. King to g5, king to g7, and now from this position, if black goes to the h7, we will outflank on the f6. If black goes to the f7, we will outflank on the h6 square. So let's assume black go to the h7, we outflank on the f6, and now we clear the path for our pawn, and we will easily able to promote. So from the beginning, if you observe the position properly, king have a three different option: king to d4, king to d6, or the pawn to h3. We already cover pawn to h3, king to d6. What if king goes to the d4? This time again, we have to capture the black's pawn. We'll shift our king to the g4, even though we can, in this option, we can go to the f4. This time there is no chance of draw, because even if black pushes pawn, we can take and we still have a chance to promote. But we go to the g4, king to e4. Now white will easily grabs the black pawn, and white pawn have enough chance to promote because white pawn is not the rook pawn. There are no any other draw position on the board. So that's all for today's video. If you like the video, press the like button and do subscribe to our channel for more informative video related to chess.